Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Chapter 6. Jim Nightshade stopped at the corner of Hickory and Main, breathing easily, his eyes fixed tenderly on the leafy darkness of Hickory Street. Will! No! Will stopped, surprised at his own violence. It's just there, the fifth house. Just 1 minute, Will! Jim pleaded softly. Minute? Will glanced down the street, which was the street of the theater. Until this summer had been an ordinary street where they had stole peaches, plums, and apricots each and its day. But late in August, while they were monkey climbing for the sourest apples, the thing happened which changed the houses, the taste of the fruit, and the very air within the gossiping trees. Will, it's waiting! Maybe something's happening! Hissed Jim. Maybe something is. Will swallowed hard, and felt Jim's hand pinch his arm. For it was no longer the street of apples, or plums, or apricots. It was the one house with a window at the side, and this window, Jim said, was a stage with a curtain, the shade, that is, up. And in that room, on that strange stage, were the actors, who spoke mysteries, mouthed wild things, laughed, sighed, murmured so much of it was whispers Will did not understand. Just one last time, Will. You know it won't be the last. Jim's face was flushed, his cheeks blazing, his eyes green glass fire. He thought of that night, them picking apples. Jim suddenly crying softly, Oh, there! And Will, clinging to the limbs of the tree, tight pressed, terribly excited, staring into the theater, that peculiar stage where people, all unknowing, flourished shirts above their heads, let fall clothes to the rug, stood raw and animal crazy, naked, like shivering horses, hands out to touch each other. What are they doing? Thought Will. Why are they laughing? What's wrong with them? What's wrong? He wished the light would go out. But he hung tight to the suddenly slippery tree and watched the bright window. Thereafter heard the laughing, and numb at last, let go, slid, fell, lay dazed, then stood in dark, gazing up at Jim, who still clung to his high limb. Jim's face, hearth flushed, cheeks fire fuzzed, lips parted, stared in. Jim! Jim, come down! But Jim did not hear. Jim! And when Jim looked down, at last he saw Will as a stranger below, with some silly request to give off living and come down to earth. So Will ran off, alone, thinking too much, thinking nothing at all, not knowing what to think. Will, please. Will looked at Jim now, with the library books in his hands. We've been to the library. Ain't that enough? Jim shook his head. Carry these for me. He handed Will his books and trotted softly off under the hissing, whispering trees. 3 houses down, he called back. Will, know what you are? A darn old dimwit Episcopal Baptist. Then Jim was gone. Will seized the books tight to his chest. They were wet from his hands. Don't look back, he thought. I won't. And looking only toward home, he walked that way, quickly. Chapter 7. Halfway home, Will felt a shadow breathing hard behind him. Theater closed, said Will, not looking back. Jim walked in silence beside him for a long time, and then said, Nobody's home. Swell, Jim spat. Darn Baptist preacher, you! And around the corner a tumbleweed slithered, a great cotton ball of pale paper which bounced, then clung shivering to Jim's legs. Will grabbed the paper, laughing, pulled it off, let it fly! He stopped laughing. The boys, watching the pail throw away, rattle and flit through the trees, were suddenly cold. Wait a minute, said Jim slowly. All of a sudden they were yelling, running, leaping. Don't tear it! Careful! The paper fluttered like a snare drum in their hands. Coming, October 24th! Their lips moved, shadowing the words set in Rocco type. Cougar and Darks. Carnival! October 24th! That's tomorrow! It can't be, said Will. All carnivals stop after Labor Day. Who cares? 1,001 wonders. See Mephistolo, the lava drinker, Mr. Electrico, the monster Montegolfer. Balloon, said Will. A Montegolfer is a balloon. Mademoiselle Tarot, read Jim. The dangling man, the demon guillotine, the illustrated man, hey! That's just an old guy with tattoos. No, Jim breathed warm on the paper. He's illustrated, special. See, covered with monsters, a menagerie. Jim's eyes jumped. See the skeleton. Ain't that fine, Will? Not thin man, no, but skeleton. See the dust witch. What's a dust witch, Will? Dirty old gypsy. No, Jim squinted off, seeing things. A gypsy that was born in the dust, raised in the dust, and someday winds up back in the dust. Here's more. Egyptian mirror maze. See herself 10,000 times. St. Anthony's Temple of Temptation. The most beautiful, read Will. Women in the world, finished Jim. They looked at each other. Can a carnival have the most beautiful woman on the earth? In its sideshow, Will? You ever seen carnival ladies, Jim? Grizzly bears. But how come this handbill claims... Oh, shut up! You mad at me, Will? No, it's just... Get it! The wind had torn the paper from their hands. The handbill blew over the trees and away in an idiot caper. Gone. It's not true anyway, Will gasped. Carnivals don't come this late in the year. Silly, darn-sounding thing. Who'd go to it? Me. Jim stood quiet in the dark. Me, thought Will, seeing the guillotine flash, Egyptian mirrors unfold accordions of light, and the sulphur-skinned devil man sipping lava like gunpowder tea. That music, Jim muttered. Calliope! Must be coming tonight! Carnivals come at sunrise. Yeah, what about the licorice and cotton candy we smelled close? And Will thought of the smells and the sounds flowing on the river of wind from beyond the darkening houses. Mr. Teatley listening by his wooden Indian friend. Mr. Cressetti with a single tear shining down his cheek. And the barber pole sliding its red tongue up and around forever, out of nowhere and away to eternity. Will's teeth chattered. Let's go home. We are home, cried Jim, surprised. For, not knowing it, they had reached their separate houses and now moved up separate walks. On his porch, Jim leaned over and called softly. Will, you're not mad? Heck no. We won't go by that street, that house, the theater, again for a month, a year, I swear. Sure, Jim, sure. They stood with their hands on the doorknobs of their houses, and Will looked up at Jim's roof where the lightning rod glittered against the cold stars. The storm was coming. The storm wasn't coming. No matter which, he was glad Jim had that grand contraption up there. Night! Night. Their separate doors slammed. Chapter 8. Will opened the door and shut it again. Quietly this time. That's better, said his mother's voice. Framed through the hall door, Will saw the only theater he cared for now. The familiar stage where sat his father. Home already, he and Jim must have run the long way round, holding a book but reading the empty spaces. In a chair by the fire, Mother knitted and hummed like a tea kettle. He wanted to be near and not near them. He saw them close. He saw them far. Suddenly they were awfully small in too large a room and too big a town, and much too huge a world. In this unlocked place, they seemed at the mercy of anything that might break in from the night. Including me, Will thought. Including me. Suddenly he loved them more for their smallness than he had ever when they seemed tall. His mother's fingers twitched. Her mouth counted. The happiest woman he had ever seen. He remembered a greenhouse on a winter day, pushing aside thick jungle leaves to find a creamy pink hothouse rose, poised to get alone in the wilderness. That was Mother, smelling like fresh milk, happy to herself in this room. Happy? But how and why? Here, a few feet off, was the janitor, the library man, the stranger, his uniform gone, but his face still the face of a man happy at night alone in the deep marble vaults, whispering his broom in the drafty corridors. Will watched, wondering why this one was so happy, and this man so sad. His father stared deep in the fire, one hand relaxed. Half cupped in that hand lay a crumpled ball of paper. Will blinked. He remembered the wind blowing the pale handbill skittering in the trees. Now the same color paper lay crushed, its Rocco type hidden, in his father's fingers. Hey! Will stepped into the parlor. Immediately Mom opened a smile that was like lighting a second fire. Dad, stricken, looked dismayed, as if caught in a criminal act. Will wanted to say, Hey, what'd you think of the handbill? But Dad was cramming the handbill deep in the chair upholstery, and Mother was leafing the library books. Oh, these are fine, Willie. So Will just stood with Cougar and Dark on his tongue and said, Boy, the wind really flew us home. Streets full of paper blowing. Dad did not flinch at this. Anything new, Dad? Dad's hand still lay tucked in the side of the chair. He lifted a gray, slightly worried, very tired gaze to his son. Stone Lion blew off the library steps, prowling the town now, looking for Christians. Won't find any. Got the only one in captivity here, and she's a good cook. Bosh, said Mom. Walking upstairs, Will heard what he half expected to hear. A soft, fluming sigh as something fresh was tossed on the fire. In his mind, he saw Dad standing at the hearth looking down as the paper crinkled to ash. Cougar. Dark. Carnival. Witch. Wonders. He wanted to go back down and stand with Dad, hands out, to be warmed by the fire. Instead, he went slowly up to shut the door of his room. Some nights, abed, Will put his ear to the wall to listen, and if his folks talked things that were right, he stayed, and if not right, he turned away. If it was about time and passing years or himself or town, or just the general inconclusive way God ran the world, he listened warmly, comfortably, secretly, for it was usually Dad talking. He could not often speak with Dad anywhere in the world, inside or out, But this was different. There was a thing in Dad's voice, up, over, down, easy as a hand winging soft in the air like a white bird describing flight patterns. Made the ear want to follow and the mind's eye to see. And the odd thing in Dad's voice was the sound truth makes being said. The sound of truth in a wild roving land of city or plain country lies will spell any boy. Many nights Will drowsed this way, his senses like stopped clocks long before that half-singing voice was still. Dad's voice was a midnight school, teaching deep fathom hours, and the subject was life. So it was this night. Will's eyes shut, head leaned to the cool plaster. At first, Dad's voice, a Congo drum, boomed softly, horizons away. Mother's voice, she used her weather-bright soprano in the Baptist choir, did not sing, yet sang back replies. Will imagined Dad sprawled talking to the empty ceiling. Will, makes me feel so old. A man should play baseball with his son. Not necessary, said the woman's voice kindly. You're a good man. In a bad season. Hell, I was 40 when he was born. And you, who's your daughter, people say. God, when you lie down, your thoughts turn to mush. Hell. Will heard the shift of weight as Dad sat up in the dark. A match was being struck. A pipe was being smoked. The wind rattled the windows. Man with posters under his arm. Carnival, said his mother's voice. This late in the year? Will wanted to turn away, but couldn't. Most beautiful woman in the world, Dad's voice muttered. Mother laughed softly. You know I'm not. No, thought Will. That's from the handbill. Why doesn't Dad tell? Because, Will answered himself. Something's going on. Oh, something is going on. Will saw that paper frolicked in the trees. Its words, the most beautiful woman, and fever prickled his cheeks. He thought, Jim, the street of the theater, the naked people in the stage of that theater window, crazy as Chinese opera, darn odd crazy as old Chinese opera, judo, jiu-jitsu, Indian puzzles, and now his father's voice, dreaming off, sadder, saddest, much too much to understand. And suddenly he was scared because Dad wouldn't talk about the handbill he had secretly burned. Will gazed out the window. There, like a milkweed plume, white paper danced in the air. No, he whispered. No carnival's coming this late. It can't. He hid under the covers, switched on his flashlight, opened a book. The first picture he saw was a prehistoric reptile trap drumming a night sky a million years lost. Heck, he thought, in the rush I got Jim's book. He's got one of mine. But it was a pretty fine reptile. And flying towards sleep, he thought he heard his father restless below, the front door shut. His father was going back to work late, for no reason, with brooms or books, downtown, away, and mother asleep, content, not knowing he had gone. Chapter 9. No one else in the world had a name came so well off the tongue. Jim Nightshade. That's me. Jim stood tall and now lay long in bed, strung together by marsh grass, his bones easy in his flesh easy on his bones. Library books lay open by his relaxed right hand. Waiting, his eyes were dark as twilight, the shadows under the eyes from the time his mother had said he'd almost died when he was 3 and still remembered. His hair was dark autumn chestnut, and the veins in his temples and brown in his neck and tickling in his wrists and on the backs of his slender hands, all these were dark blue. He was marbled with dark, was Jim Nightshade, a boy who talked less and smiled less as the years increased. The trouble with Jim was you looked at the world and could not look away. And when you never look away all your life, by the time you are 13, you have done 20 years taking in the laundry of the world. Will Holloway, it was in him young to always look just beyond, over to one side. So at 13, he had saved up only 6 years of staring. Jim knew every centimeter of his shadow, could have cut it out of tar paper, furled it, and run it up a flagpole, his banner. Will, he was occasionally surprised to see a shadow following him somewhere, but that was that. Jim, you awake? Hi, Mom. A door opened and now shut. He felt her weight on the bed. Why, Jim, your hands are ice. You shouldn't have the window so high. Mind your health. Sure. Don't say sure that way. You don't know till you've had 3 children and lost all but one. Never going to have any, said Jim. You just say that. I know it. I know everything. She waited a moment. What do you know? No use making more people. People die. His voice was very calm and quiet, and almost sad. That's everything. Almost everything. You're here, Jim. If you weren't, I'd given up long ago. Mom. A long silence. Can you remember Dad's face? Do I look like him? The day you go away is the day he leaves forever. Who's going away? Why, just lying here, Jim. You run so fast. I never saw anyone move so much just sleeping. Promise me, Jim, wherever you go and come back, bring lots of kids. Let them run wild. Let me spoil them someday. I'm never going to own anything can hurt me. You're going to collect rocks, Jim? No, someday you've got to be hurt. No, I don't. He looked at her. Her face had been hit a long time ago. The bruises had never gone from around her eyes. You'll live and get hurt, she said in the dark. But when it's time, tell me. Say goodbye. Otherwise, I might not let you go. Wouldn't that be terrible, to just grab a hold? She rose up suddenly and went to put the window down. Why do boys want their windows opened so wide? Warm blood. Warm blood. She stood alone. That's the story of all our sorrows. And don't ask why. The door shut. Jim, alone, raised the window and leaned into the absolutely clear night. Storm, he thought. You there? Yes. Feel. Away to the west. A real humdinger rushing along. The shadow of the lightning rod lay on the drive below. He sucked in cold air, gave out a vast exhilaration of heat. Why, he thought, why don't I climb up, knock that lightning rod loose, and throw it away? And then see what happens. Yes, and then see what happens. Chapter 10. Just after midnight. Shuffling footsteps. Along the empty street came the lightning rod salesman. His leather valise swung almost empty in his baseball mitt hand, his face at ease. He turned a corner and stopped. Paper-soft white moths tapped an empty store window, looking in. And in the window, like a great coffin boat of star-colored glass, beached on two sawhorses lay a chunk of Alaska Snow Company ice, chopped to a size great enough to flash in a giant's ring. And sealed in this ice was the most beautiful woman in the world. The lightning rod salesman's smile faded. In the dreaming coldness of ice, like someone fallen and slept in snow avalanches 1,000 years, forever young, was this woman. She was as fair as this morning and fresh as tomorrow's flowers, and lovely as any maid when a man shuts his eyes and traps her, in cameo perfection, on the shell of his eyelids. The lightning rod salesman remembered to breathe. Once, long ago, traveling among the marbles of Rome and Florence, he had seen a woman like this, kept in stone instead of ice. Once, wandering in the Louvre, he had found woman like this, washed in summer color and kept in paint. Once, as a boy, sneaking the cool grottos behind a motion picture theater screen, on his way to a free seat, he had glanced up, and there, towering and flooding the haunted dark, seen a woman's face as he had never seen it since. Such size and beauty built of milk bone and moon flesh as to freeze him there, alone behind the stage, shadowed by the motion of her lips, the bird-wing flicker of her eyes, the snow-pale death shimmering illumination from her cheeks. So from other years there jumped forth images which flowed and found new substance here within the ice. What color was her hair? It was blonde to whiteness and might take any color once set free of cold. How tall was she? The prism of the ice might well multiply her size, or diminish her as you moved this way or that before the empty store, the window, the night-soft raft tapping, ever fingering, gently probing moths. Not important. Far above all, the lightning rod salesman shivered. He knew the most extraordinary thing. If by some miracle her eyelids should open within that sapphire, and she should look at him, he knew what color her eyes would be. He knew what color her eyes would be. If one were to enter this lonely night shop, if one were to put forth one's hand, the warmth of that hand would... what? Melt the ice. Lightning rod salesman stood there for a long moment, his eyes quick and shut. He let out his breath. It was warm as summer on his teeth. His hand touched the shop door. It swung open. Cold Arctic air blew out around him. He stepped in. The door shut. The white snowflake moths tapped at the window.